Social media giant Twitter suspended more than 70,000 individual user accounts in just a couple of days. Twitter alternative Parler was taken off the internet completely, courtesy of Amazon. And YouTube, along with Google, are actively deleting dislikes on videos and apps. Content and users across most of the social media channels are being flagged, restricted, deplatformed, and blocked more and more frequently. So if you were to say that freedom of speech has been under attack recently, you would not be wrong. This is the internet in 2021, and we're not even at the end of February. Whether that's done in the name of protecting lives or for other reasons, if we really want to have an informed and balanced opinion on a subject, it pays to look into it a little more deeply. When is it okay to censor free speech? What does abuse of censorship actually mean, and what effect does it have on you? Welcome to the Rational Self-Development series. In this video, we will break down the multiple functions and purposes of free speech. We're all about empowering your personal growth, so stick around to the end where we will show you how freedom of speech ties into your personal development as well. Wikipedia says that freedom of speech is a principle that supports the freedom of an individual or a community to articulate their opinions and ideas without fear of retaliation, censorship, or legal sanction. The term freedom of expression is sometimes used synonymously, but includes any act of seeking, receiving, and imparting information or ideas, regardless of the medium used. So what's the main purpose of free speech?
I am the king! I will punish you.
Well, historically, wherever there wasn't free speech, power and wealth would accumulate in the hands of the few. Imagine a ruler that was in charge of the people. The way they stayed in power was largely through making it illegal to be criticized. Punishments varied, but they usually included physical harm, death, and later on incarceration. Have you ever wondered why it is that societies have been able to commit atrocities for hundreds of years, even though it is obvious to us now that they were immoral and wrong for doing so? Witch hunts, slavery, segregation, etc. Sure, people were less educated, but their brain capacity was the same, so why did that happen? Well, when people aren't speaking out against what is happening, it is very easy for us to assume that everyone agrees with those practices. You may not personally agree, but because you won't speak out against it out of fear of being reported or punished, and I won't speak out for the same reasons, and our family and neighbors don't speak out either, we just don't realize that we're not the only ones who disagree. Not allowing others to speak out against anything that was being done, those in power could do whatever they liked. This, as you can probably imagine, not only tended towards and perpetuated unethical behavior, as it could essentially go unchecked, but it also meant that societies stagnated, because better ideas such as new scientific discoveries and observations couldn't be studied or expressed. So if you look at the actual function of free speech, then you'll see that it works to protect people that have little power from people in a position of more power. If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. So how does free speech impact our lives today? These days, it's actually no different. Freedom of speech has precisely the same purpose. Within companies, it prevents people from being exploited, as employees can speak out against that. Reports of unsuitable working conditions make sure that companies have to improve the way they function. And in the case of misconduct, freedom of speech allows those responsible to be charged. A good example of this would be the Me Too movement. Whether the punishments are currently harsh enough to sufficiently prevent those types of crimes or not, that's another issue. But even if you look at a family unit, free speech is necessary to stop unhealthy behaviors, like family violence. An abused family member can speak out about what happened to them, and they can seek help. Beyond businesses and families, when there is freedom of speech, people can let the public know what is going on within the structures of governance, so that representatives that actually act in the public's best interest, the ones that improve conditions for the public, can be voted in, and those that do not do so can be voted out. Today, different countries have various levels of freedom of speech, and there are clearly still a lot of issues we need to resolve. But, though it may be difficult to see, statistics show that societies worldwide are getting better overall, more so than most people believe. Free speech has been paramount in our improvement. It is what has been allowing us to recognize and acknowledge problems and create and implement corresponding solutions. And yes, that is an ongoing process. A world without freedom of speech is a world of slavery and tyranny. Just like a tree only grows sturdy roots and strong branches through being exposed to the elements, You cannot expand your mind in an echo chamber. You cannot grow, at least not healthily. Ideas and concepts cannot become robust if they are not allowed to be criticized. Indeed, there is calculable danger when people aren't allowed to express themselves because they do not stop believing what they're emotionally invested in. What happens instead is that they will take it underground, seek out like-minded people, and form echo chambers. They do not have the opportunity to grow more healthily as they aren't exposed to being questioned about their ideas and beliefs anymore, since they are prohibited from expressing themselves. Without feedback, their ideas stand unchallenged. The ideas are sidestepped and will inevitably lead to ill-informed backlashes. Idealizing freedom of speech versus reality. There's an idealistic view that says freedom of speech lets the best idea win. Well, that is not necessarily true at all. It would largely depend on the effort and dedication of people putting their ideas forward, as well as people putting in effort and dedication into understanding and implementing those ideas. You could just be a genius in your own basement, never getting around to getting your ideas out. What we can say, however, is that free speech at least stops the worst idea from being in charge. And that is something. Anything above hellish nightmare is worth fighting for, right? So when is censorship justified? Censorship is necessary only in a select few circumstances. One such time would be if free speech directly and implicitly threatened the lives of an individual or group. So if people were to incite physical harm to an individual or a group, then it is in the best interest of the majority to censor this speech. But it has to be a clear call for violence, not something that is misinterpreted as such. The use of hyperbole, sarcasm, and exaggeration to illustrate a point does not justify censorship, even if it is done in bad taste. People must learn to be able to distinguish between the use of hyperbole and the actual intent of wanting to harm, as well as to ascertain if there is a real threat or danger to anyone's physical well-being. Also, if someone were to misunderstand such an expression for a call to violence, the person acting on it is still responsible for their own behavior. It is important to make a distinction there because censorship is only justified when there is an actual threat to a person's physical health, not an imagined one. So, context and intention matter. It's important to learn to differentiate between someone who is intending to incite others to commit physical violence and someone who is raising the temperature with the words they're saying. Though they may appear similar at first glance, they're not the same thing. We need to be careful to examine the intent in combination with the words within the context they're expressed. Imagine a scenario where you discover that one of your housemates or your partner forgot to turn the lights off before they left the house, or they didn't take the rubbish out once again, or they left their dirty dishes out. You might get annoyed and say, "I'm going to kill her when she gets back," or "his head is on the chopping block." You usually don't intend to actually harm them. Instead, you mean that you will talk to them about it, maybe even rather angrily. It's your right to express yourself hyperbolically, without a need to be censored, and it is not your responsibility that people may misinterpret you. Additionally, there's a difference to be made between people being offended at a statement and people being physically hurt. Violence is defined as behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. If we define violence as anything other than being physically injured, then it is always going to be tempting to say that someone's position is emotionally violent and should be censored, rather than to honestly engage in the actual argument. Being offended is not something that we should or even can prevent, as anyone can take offense, as you would know if you have been on the internet for any length of time. People can take offense at the silliest things. So what about freedom of speech and independent companies? It is illegal for independent and private companies to violate human rights. This already is how they have to operate. That's why we no longer have slavery and children are no longer made to work. Everyone has the right to freedom of expression. This right includes the freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority. This means that if you run a service that allows people to communicate with each other, you should have to uphold the right to free expression. You can also look at it like this. I'm sure we can all agree that anyone in power should serve the greater good, ethically speaking. So when a person, legal entity, or corporation does not do that, it means that they work for their own benefit, meaning they serve a minority, themselves and probably their invested friends. This minority then, by definition, works against the majority of the people, and as such against the greater good of the many. Anyone who does this should simply not be allowed to do so. If you want society to improve, you need to fight for and allow people to express themselves, even if, and maybe especially so when you disagree with what they're saying. So what does all this mean for you? How do the principles of freedom of speech tie into your personal development?
Honestly expressing yourself. Now, it is very difficult to do. I mean, it is easy for me to put on a show and be cocky and be flooded with a cocky feeling and then feel like pretty cool and all that. Or I can make all kinds of phony things, you see what I mean? Blinded by it. Or I can show you some really fancy movement. But to express oneself honestly, not lying to oneself, and to express myself honestly, that, my friend, is very hard to do.
In a context of free speech, what's true on a macro scale is also true on a micro scale. The principles of free speech also encompass your subjective experience. Having an open and honest dialogue with people is important for your ability to comprehend their experiences, as well as understanding how reality works in general. On a more personal level, you shouldn't suppress parts of yourself you may find uncomfortable. Instead, learn to understand them, change, and assimilate them in a healthy way that allows you to reach greater happiness and more competency. And that's why upholding freedom of speech is paramount, within societies as a whole and individually for every single one of us. Thank you for watching. Has this been useful to you? What do you think about freedom of speech? If you got something out of this video, please give it a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to our channel. We'll bring you more content covering personal development, relationships, and intelligent spirituality, so that you can make more sense of the world around you as well as within.